My four best bets to win the 2026 Heisman Trophy. Welcome into Overtime with Matt Moscona. I am Matt Moscona. Been hosting Afternoon Drive on ESPN Radio in Baton Rouge for nearly 20 years. Also the publisher at LouisianaSports.net and the host of Locked On LSU. College football season is almost upon us, and the Heisman Trophy is the most famous individual award in sports. I think that's not even really debatable. Whether you love it, hate it, pay attention to it or not, it's something that not only is something we talk about throughout the entirety of the college football season, it carries a great degree of cachet and symbolism. When you win a Heisman Trophy, you are forever known as a Heisman Trophy winner, and that's how you oftentimes are referred to. It creates economies around the award as well. It's a great recruiting tool. So whether you love it or don't, the Heisman Trophy matters. And it's interesting to me because when a season starts, we always look at the preseason favorite list and just assume it's going to be a quarterback from one of the top schools. And then you pop up and you see Fernando Mendoza win it this past year. Or you see Travis Hunter from Colorado become this sort of anomaly of a two-way guy that wins the Heisman Trophy. Or you have a quarterback that comes out of nowhere virtually like Joe Burrow did in 2019 to have the greatest individual season for a quarterback ever. Burrow, the season before in 2018, went the entire month of October without throwing a touchdown pass. Nobody could have seen that. So Jaden Daniels at LSU was a 3-loss Heisman Trophy winner. Same with RG3 at Baylor. So you get the point. It's very seldom the guy at the beginning of the season who you think it is. As a matter of fact, a few tidbits about the Heisman Trophy. So I'm going to give you, with all of this criteria, the 4 names that I think are really worth keeping an eye on, and if you do sports bet, maybe worth holding a ticket on. Quarterbacks have won 16 of the last 21 Heisman Trophies. Okay, that's 76%. So ultimately, yes, this is a quarterback award. If you look back to 2005, running backs have won 3 Heisman Trophies. There was Devontae Smith in the COVID year at Alabama, who was the only wide receiver to win the award in that span. And as we mentioned, there was Travis Hunter, who was a two-way anomaly. He was both a receiver and a defensive back, and he just had a spectacular season in a year where a quarterback on a great team didn't necessarily do enough to win the award. But there's some criteria that are also indisputable when you're trying to identify who a Heisman winner could be. So the average losses for the Heisman winners over the last 2 decades is 1.25 losses. So basically what you're saying is this is a team that's got to be a contender and basically be a 10-2 or 11-1 football team, right? If you're outside of that 10-win range, it's going to take an otherworldly season like Jaden Daniels or RG3, and history shows that's just not very common. And the preseason betting favorite has only won the award 1 time since 2014. So the person who we think it is at the start of the season, for example, a year ago, that was Arch Manning at Texas, who was the preseason betting favorite. He had a lot of cachet. He had name recognition. He had talent around him. He had the big brand of Texas. They were going to be playing on national TV a lot. Well, he really struggled in the first month of the season and then caught fire late, had a fine season, but ultimately for Arch, it was too much to overcome late in the season, and he was on a 3-loss team. It's also worth noting that 2/3 of the winners over the last 2 decades, 2 out of 3 winners over the last 2 decades, started the season on a team ranked outside of the AP top 5. So as to say, if you're looking at the preseason top 5 and thinking, okay, well, who are the quarterbacks on those teams? Bet on those guys. That's probably going to be one of them. History shows that's not exactly the case. Certainly Fernando Mendoza was an anomaly, was an unknown a season ago coming to Indiana from Cal, but they hit on it. He had an awesome season. They went undefeated, won the national championship, as we well know, and he was a very worthy winner of the Heisman Trophy. So basically, if you're thinking of how to put together a list of players who you think could win the Heisman, it obviously has to be on an elite team, right? Like we just talked about it. It's got to be a team that wins 10 or more games in the regular season, 10, 11, or 12-0. And I guess you can factor into it the conference championship games because the Heisman is awarded after the conference championship games. You have to be on national TV. Look, a couple of years ago, Ashton Genty had an outstanding season at Boise State, but he played at Boise State. And Boise State wasn't playing in a lot of marquee games for him to impress voters. He had very few opportunities to do that. If you're a quarterback in a major conference who's playing in a lot of national TV games, you're going to have a lot of opportunities. And of course, there's the quote unquote Heisman moment, but that's something that's hard to quantify what that is. It's more of a qualifier. It's a subjective notion of what that Heisman moment is for that player. Of course, for Fernando Mendoza, the amazing comeback last season against Penn State is something that the touchdown pass to Omar Cooper where Gus Johnson lost his voice. That's the one that people will often refer to. So if I'm looking at the favorites, I'm going to listen. You can hold a ticket on CJ Carr. He's the bet from Notre Dame. He's the betting favorite. And when you look at CJ Carr, really the problem he may run into is he could very well put up amazing numbers. But for CJ Carr, Notre Dame's schedule is probably going to work against him because Notre Dame really is only going to have 2 opportunities all season to play in a marquee game. They play Wisconsin, Rice, Michigan State, Purdue, North Carolina, Stanford, at BYU, Navy, Miami, and that's November the 7th, so it is late in the season. But after they play Miami down the stretch when conference championship races are in full swing, Notre Dame's going to play Boston College, SMU, and Syracuse. So even if CJ Carr is putting up big numbers, it's going to be in relative obscurity. There's also players like Arch Manning, Julian Sayin, and Dante Moore at Texas, Ohio State, and Oregon, respectively. There's just so much hype with those players when you think about it, because we already know them. And when you have that hype, there is a certain expectation. It's why it's very difficult for a player to win the award in back-to-back years, because when you set that bar, you have to clear it and hope that someone else doesn't have another otherworldly season. For example, Matt Leinart won the award in 2004. Well, he returned in 2005 and actually had better numbers in 2005 than he did when he won it in 2004. But there was Reggie Bush. You think about Tim Tebow in 2007 when he won the award as a sophomore. Well, in 2008, he had a better statistical season, but Sam Bradford threw for 50 touchdowns that year. We can keep going on with examples like this. Jameis Winston in 2013 won the award as a redshirt freshman, and he just never replicated those numbers of the success they had in the national championship season. So that makes it tough for players like that. I'm not going to say that any of Carr, Manning, Sayin, Moore can't or won't win the award. I'm just looking at where is the value of holding a ticket on a player to win the Heisman Trophy based on what the history of the past 20 years has shown us. So I'm going to give you 4 names. The first one is Darian Mensah. Darian Mensah was at Tulane, was outstanding, went to Duke, won the ACC this past year at Duke, and amid some controversy transferred to Miami, of course, after having already signed his deal with Duke, and Miami paid the buyout. We've seen Miami quarterbacks have great success. Cam Ward, a couple of seasons ago, transferring in from Washington State, had an otherworldly season and becomes the first overall pick. Last year was Carson Beck. Well, the numbers weren't Heisman worthy. They played for a national championship. And with the schedule that Miami is going to play this year, I think Darian Mensah certainly is going to have a great opportunity. Remember, Mensah last year at Duke threw for 3,973 yards. So he's just a hair under 4,000 passing yards and 34 touchdowns. He also, now he's not a big-time running threat. He actually had negative rushing yards last year at Duke, 59 carries for negative 32. Of course, college is stupid. They count sack yardage against quarterbacks' rushing total. But this isn't the dual threat guy the perception may be, but he's an incredible passer. And when you look at Miami's schedule for Darian Mensah, he's going to have a lot of opportunity to put up numbers and win a lot of games. They do play at Clemson. They have a game, and then the game we just mentioned at Notre Dame. He does get a home game against Duke in November as well that a lot of people might be keeping an eye on. But so for Mensah, it's really only those 2 games. A late season game at home against Virginia Tech maybe as well. But really the game at Clemson, October the 3rd, and at Notre Dame on November the 7th, Mensah is one worth keeping an eye on. I think John Mateer at Oklahoma is someone we have to talk about. I was at SEC Football Media Days in Tampa a week ago, and Oklahoma, for me, was my biggest takeaway coming out of SEC Media Days. They had arguably the best defense in college football last year. They did lead the country in sacks and TFLs, and they were top 10 in all the major statistical categories. And they return a lot from that defense as well. So I'm assuming Oklahoma is going to be in the mix nationally. So they will be playing meaningful games. And if you want to talk about playing in the spotlight, week 2 at Michigan. They also play at Georgia in September. October the 10th, they play Texas in the neutral site game in Dallas. They have a game at Florida in November. They play Ole Miss, Texas A&M in November, and then they wrap up the regular season at Missouri on November 28th. So John Mateer, who a season ago was the guy who after a month had become the betting favorite to win the Heisman Trophy, now entering his 5th collegiate season, but he's going to have those opportunities. And you look at how he started, throwing for nearly 400 yards against Illinois State, secured the win against Michigan, threw for 282 against Temple. They beat Auburn where he threw for 271. The stats were there. And then, of course, he injured himself, came back probably too soon against Texas, and it just was never the same for John Mateer a season ago. If Mateer can do over 12 games what he did over the first 4 a season ago, and if Oklahoma is standing there at the end, maybe even going to Atlanta for the SEC championship game, Mateer is someone at plus 2,500 that it's worth holding a ticket. I'll stay in the SEC, and I'll give you Sam Leavitt. And this is another one that checks a lot of those boxes. The question is, do you trust Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weis to have a productive offense? LSU's offense last year was one of the worst rushing offenses in the country and one of the worst total offenses in the country. Now, part of that was Garrett Nussmeier having a cyst on his back that wasn't diagnosed until after the season, and he was extremely limited, which obviously affected the offense. But if you believe Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weis will come in and with this cast of characters will immediately allow a quarterback to put up significant numbers, throw for 3,000 yards, run for 700 yards, then Sam Leavitt is statistically going to do what he needs to do to be in the Heisman conversation. Now, I could also point out the fact that when you look at the games that LSU is going to play, early and often LSU is going to be in marquee games. They open against Clemson. Week 3, they're at Ole Miss, which is probably going to be the most anticipated game in the entire college football season because of the Lane Kiffin element. A week after that, they're home against Texas A&M, who was in the playoff a year ago. There's a trip to Auburn. When you look at November, like playing meaningful games in the final month of the season that define the playoff race, it's every week for LSU. Home against home against Alabama, home against Texas, at Tennessee, and then they wrap up at Arkansas. So if Sam Leavitt can stay healthy, and if he can put up numbers in this offense like most quarterbacks do in Lane Kiffin's offense, then Leavitt is a ticket at 2,500 worth holding. And the fourth is a bit of a long shot that I want to give you, and this may be the one that I'm the most excited about, and it's Washington quarterback DeMond Williams. Now, DeMond Williams is plus 5,500. He is the definition of a dual threat quarterback, and I will be stunned if DeMond Williams isn't playing meaningful games in November because of how the schedule shapes up. So a season ago, DeMond Williams, as a sophomore, threw for 3,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, and ran for another 600 yards and 6 scores. What if DeMond Williams this year, his 3rd year with Jed Fish in that offense, throws for 4,000 yards and runs for 1,000? That is something that's plausible if he builds on what he did a season ago. You're talking about a guy that could have a statistical anomaly similar to what we saw from Jaden Daniels in 2023. I'm not saying he's going to do that and replicate that exactly, but what I'm talking about is you're going to have outsized passing and rushing totals. And then when you look at the schedule that Washington plays, this is the reason why they're going to should be playing meaningful games in November. They open with the Apple Cup at home against Washington State. That should be a win. Then they play Utah State and Eastern Washington. So, of course, in the Big Ten, the first 3 weeks are all non-conference. After that, it's 9 straight weeks of conference opponents. This is how the rest of the schedule plays out. Home against Minnesota. They should be 4-0. Then they go to Southern Cal. Now, I understand that's not an easy trip, and Southern Cal was 7-2 in the league a season ago. But that's a conference rival. They know each other well, and I don't know that I'm a big believer in Lincoln Riley and Southern Cal. Maybe they're a slight underdog in that game, but if you win that and you move to 5-0, then all of a sudden you look up and you have a breather basically you should coast until the final 2 weeks of the regular season. After Southern Cal, you play Iowa. Then Iowa's got to come to Seattle. So they got to cross 2 time zones. Then you go to Purdue. And Purdue is not an easy, it's not an easy trip. It's going to be in mid-October. It could be cold, and you're crossing 2 time zones. There's a lot of data which shows the difficulty teams have had crossing multiple time zones since the Big Ten expanded. Then you get an open date, and you got to go to Nebraska. Again, could be a cold weather game. Great crowd in Nebraska as always. Do you believe in Matt Rule, Dylan Raiola? I don't. But again, the travel's tough, but you do have an open date between Purdue and Nebraska. Then it's Penn State to begin November. What is Matt Campbell's inaugural team going to be? I don't know, but Penn State's going to have to cross from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. They have to go across country to play that game. Big time favorite in that situation for the spot on the schedule for Washington. Then they go to Michigan State, who was 1-8 in the league a year ago. There's a real chance that going into the final 2 weeks that Washington could be 10-0. They should be favored in every game except maybe that trip to Southern Cal. And they finish up with their two most difficult games, home against Indiana and at Oregon. Home against the defending champ and at one of the preseason favorites to win the national championship. So you will have an opportunity in those games to play yourself in theory even if you lose to Southern Cal. You split the games against Indiana and Oregon, you're 10-2. You should very well be in the college football playoff, and maybe you have an opportunity for a marquee win and a Heisman moment for DeMond Williams. At plus 5,500, there is real value there, in my eyes, for DeMond Williams, given all the criteria that we talked about. So that's my short list. Again, I kind of look at voting or betting on the Heisman almost like golf. You take what is the nut that you want to bet on a given tournament, and then you pick the 5, 6, 7 golfers that you think have the best shot, and you sprinkle a bit on each to where no matter how it comes, if one of the golfers that you have the ticket on wins, you're going to come out plus money. That's kind of how I think about the Heisman as well. Darian Mensah, John Mateer, Sam Leavitt, DeMond Williams. I'm going to have a ticket on each of those guys when the season kicks off. You better get it early, because if they have early success, this is the best number you're likely going to get. Let me know your thoughts. Who did I leave out? Agree or disagree? Fire away and let me know. And hey, listen, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Please subscribe. Smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And if you're on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. Until next time, it's Overtime with Matt Moscona.